Welcome again to our community here, Seattle Power BI User Group. This is our October session today. And first of all, let's go with some group introductions. Let's hit our feedback survey, please. It's going to be great for all of us if we complete the survey because that allows us to understand what are your priorities, what are your insights. Any feedback that we heard from the team and from the community is going to be welcome and great to hear from all of you. So please get our feedback on the meetup group. And then we're going to hit the speaker introduction. First of all, Seattle Power BI User Group. Who, what, and why? This is a huge collection of enthusiasts in Power BI field. All of us, we start from scratch in Power BI. Some of us a long time ago, some of us pretty recently, but all of us, we love kind of the storytelling, getting visuals, getting on DAX, getting on data modeling. Feel free to share your insights. Feel free to share your knowledge. That is a key element of this community, to share between all of us what we learned so far from this community and we learned from so far from this framework. Power BI is being a lot of going on back and forth in terms of starting more from the data visualization side of things. Now is a whole data platform world coming into as a piece of fabric for all of them that they've been kind of asking these questions around. Power BI is Power Platform, Power BI is Fabric, Power BI is Office. What is Power BI? Power BI is everywhere. It's kind of a glue that is landing in every single piece of Microsoft services. So Power BI is still part of the Power Platform family, is part of the Fabric family, is part of the Office 365. So between all of us, we are going to try to get, those insights and sharing that knowledge between all of our communities. In our kind of meetings, what we would love to hear so far is try to be visible. If you're comfortable, just open your mic, open your camera if you want to share with all of us. We be aware of others, be friendly and patient with all the community members, be welcoming because we would love to hear from everyone here, be open to all kind of questions. We are trying to commit on those questions. Even if you have questions offline, go to our meetup site or to our Power BI user group site and please open any discussions that you want to open or any ideas that you have or any topics that you want to bring to the table. Of course, be kind and considerate others into the meeting if you want to join this meetup and you want to share with all of us any or our insights. As I mentioned before, attend and provide feedback, recommend any speakers, or if you have any kind of stories, you don't need to be, as I mentioned before, around this, you don't need to be an expert on Guru in any area. We would love to hear your story around ramping up on Power BI or any kind of past project experience. Eventually, if it's a personal project, feel free to connect with us and share your knowledge. If you want to volunteer, we are always asking people for help on volunteer for any kind of activity or task with our Seattle Power BI group. So, and if you want to recommend any topic, of course, welcome to do that. Today, I have the pleasure to present Russ Brinkerhoff, a good friend. He's been working with all of us as an organizer for this Power BI user group. He's been with Slalom for a long time. We are colleagues at Slalom. We are friends doing a bunch of data analytics projects together. He's been with Power BI even before Power BI was naming as Power BI. I'm saying that he's a gold guy. Yeah, that is Russ. And of course, he loves all around the connection between the Azure data services, multiple projects on that side of things between Azure and connecting the dots between Power BI, different data services, and Power Platform itself. So I have pleasure to work with Russ, and let's kick it off to talk a lot around Power BI performance and different tools to make it happen. Back to you, Russ.
Gaston, thank you. Very, very kind. You're a good friend. I appreciate that. I like the slide. I think it was 1 or 2 slides ago. One of our rules was to be kind to each other. So everyone be kind to me today. If I mess up, be nice. But no, I'm glad to be here. All right. First of all, I got to show you, I'm representing the SeaPUG t-shirt. So if you want one of these, very easy to get one. Come on and speak. You got to volunteer and be a speaker. Then you get a t-shirt. So there you go. I got mine in advance just because I have like the prototype. I had to make sure it worked, right? So the shirt works. It's great. Come get one. Volunteer to teach and share some content at SeaPUG. All right. Gaston, I'm going to share my screen. I have the same slide deck that you do, but I've got a lot of content I'll be sharing. So let me do this. And you should see something that says optimizing performance in Power BI. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see that? All right, I got some thumbs up. All right, perfect. I'm going to go full screen, and then I'm going to do that old switcheroo thing, because when you got multiple screens, sometimes you got to do some fancy. Yep. All right, here we go. This is my PowerPoint hack. Display settings, swap, bingo. All right, we're good. You didn't know that hack? It's very helpful, especially on multiple screens. You got to sometimes tell PowerPoint where it should display. All right. Optimizing performance in Power BI. I love this topic. I love it so much that I created a class where I teach this topic. So it's fun for me. The reason why the class that I teach came to be is because so many of my clients were struggling with this, especially when Power BI first launched. You'll hear people say, oh, Power BI is great, but it's so slow, right? Or, oh, I've got this report I really like, but it takes 10 minutes to open. And I thought, there's no way it's that bad. Like, what's going on here? So you get underneath the covers and you figure out what's going on. And I'll share some things today about all that. But it really made me appreciate the performance of good design and what that means. And so anyway, let me jump to my next slide. And I wanted to talk about how I'm approaching this topic, because there's different ways you can think about this. First of all, if any of you have questions as we go ahead and throw them in the chat. Like, you can totally stop me. I got about 30 slides I'm going to try to get to. I'll make sure that we're done on time. But yeah, if someone could just say, hey, Russ, we got a question or whatever, just in case I miss it. But feel free to pepper them in as we go. Okay, so here's my approach to performance optimization. It's a developer-first approach. So what that means is that if you're designing, if you're modeling, if you're starting to bring in visuals and create things, if you're working with users and getting their requirements, whatever it is, you should think about performance best practices. You should think about it before, right? Not after you create the report and then go back and try to fix it. Think about it as you go. Now, admins have special tools and reports to identify a slow performing report or a slow performing data set, or maybe a user that has a bad experience. We're not doing that today. We can have a whole thing on admins and what they can do. But the fact of the matter is, most of us are not going to be admins, right? A lot of us are working for our companies, we're building reports, or we have a client we're building a report for. They're the admins, right? So this report is about designing a report right before it goes into production, because that's always the best approach. So that's how we're approaching this performance optimization topic today. All right. So with that, what is good performance? What does that mean if we say, I want good performance? Studies focus on web browsing, right? Which is a reasonable comparison to the Power BI service. You're on the web, you're looking at a report, okay? Studies have said, how long does it take for a user to get frustrated? All right, so a Zona research study back in '99 says 8 seconds. A Nielsen study in '97, 10 seconds. A Hoxmeyer and DeSazer study in 2000 says 12 seconds. So somewhere it says between 8 and 12 seconds before your user gets frustrated. I'm going to show you one more thought I had, because I have a daughter. The TikTok generation, yeah, you got 6 seconds max. That's it. So they
Yeah,
see
Russ, I
something.
was going to say it's probably 2 seconds these days.
It might be 2, right? You got a couple seconds and then they're swiping, right? Like I'm past you, right? Same thing for a Power BI report. Someone opens that report. If you don't capture them quickly with like almost an instant load, you might lose somebody, right? Wesley, 3 seconds is your threshold, right? Yeah, so the TikTok generation, which is, I don't know if that's a made up thing, I'm saying that, but it seems like the time for attention is going down, which means it's getting faster, right? So you got to start thinking about all that. So the slides that I'm going through today, I've got different sections. I've got a section about like storing the report and where you're locating that on what server. I've got a thing about report design. I've got a thing about data model and what we can do there. I've got a part about DAX and how we can optimize DAX. And then we're going to cover the third-party tools, which I'm excited about. So you'll see those are coming. Okay, so on we go. So let's start with this, storage mode and location. Now, some of these slides, I've got a little Microsoft shout out on them if it's copyright Microsoft, because there's some great material that Microsoft shared with their partners. So a lot of these slides are from that material, but the demos and the stories, I'll tell you, they're all mine. So that's when we'll get into the fun stuff. So if you see on one of these pages a little thing that says, hey, it's demo time or client story time, you'll know it's time for a break. And we'll break this up a little bit. I'll do some demos and share some stories as well. All right, so with that, let me flip to our first section. Okay, so when we think about storage mode and location, okay, different ways to connect reports to the data sources. There's an import mode, which means I'm bringing all the data in. And I'm going to talk a little bit foundational for people that are newer to Power BI. There's direct query, which means my data is sitting on a server. I'm connecting to that server and I'm just pulling in the data that I need. I'm just pulling in results. I'm not downloading all of the data. All right. So import is your first choice. It's great. If you've got a small data set, you can fit it all in your memory. Awesome. Do import. Bring all your data in. What's a size? You know, I try to say if it's under maybe 100 megabytes, maybe even 200 megabytes. If you've got a data that if you build a Power BI report, it's only 100 megabytes or less, you're probably okay to do import. When you start to get above 100, 200, even 500 megabytes, you need to think about a different storage mode, okay? Some considerations, and this is kind of neat about the import mode, the rule of thumb for how compressible your data is. This is one of the beautiful things about Power BI. It compresses your data down after you're done in Power Query, you know, modeling the data and bringing it all in and mashing it up with M code. It compresses it. It used to be 5x compression, then it was 10x. It's up to 20 now. So it really squeezes that data down, which is nice. So those are some benefits about import mode. However, when you've got a data model that's getting too big, start to think about a composite model. Composite means I can maybe aggregate for some of my big data and have some summary tables. Maybe those are import, but maybe I do direct query for some of my other stuff. Now, a lot of this argument about what's the best mode goes away when Fabric's got this great thing called Direct Lake. And I love this slide. It's actually an overlay on top because up here at the top, you got direct query and you can see some things, and direct query is slower, but you get real-time data, great. Then you've got import mode, super fast, but a little latent because you imported the data. So that data is only as fresh as your last refresh that you ran on the data set. So you can get old data, right? And it says latent because your data is not always fresh, and duplicative because you're downloading all the data instead of leaving it from its source, leaving it where it is already. Direct Lake and Fabric solves all of that, which I love. And so that's why it says perfect right here on the Direct Lake line, because it combines the best of both worlds. Your data stays in one lake. You have this Direct Lake connection. You get incredible performance over massive size data sets. Fabric is a game changer. Now, this is not a thing about Fabric. I can talk about Fabric all day. That'll be coming. We'll probably do a lot of sessions on Fabric coming up. But I just wanted to call out that Direct Lake is another mode that's coming soon to a Fabric environment near you. All right, moving on. The next thing to think about as far as location and where to store your data. If you've got a critical data set, move it to your premium capacity. That's great. Do not overload your premium capacity with everything. A lot of my clients thought, hey, once I bought premium, That means I'll put all my data and all my reports on that one premium server. Well, that's the thing about a premium capacity. It's a single server, right? Multiple cores and whatever, but you're dealing with one set size of data and compute power. And so better to keep your most critical data sets and the stuff that matters the most in that premium and everything else in regular mode. Another thing to think about, and this is down at the bottom of this page, is if you have multiple premium nodes, move your data as close as possible to your population. So if you have a global population, if you have people in Europe that are going to be looking at your reports, move the data there, put it on a server that's in Europe so they get the best performance possible, right? Also consider business hours for those users. You don't want to be refreshing your data in the middle of business hours. Do it overnight, right? Do it at midnight, do it at 2 a.m., whatever, if you're scheduling a refresh. But again, Direct Lake is going to change all of that. But just start to think about some of these things. It'll help out with performance. Okay, that's it for storage mode and location. I wanted to keep that part light. This next part is meaty, and this gets into my first demo is coming up here in a little bit, but it's about the design of the report. When we're developing the report, what can we control? All right, number one for report optimization. This is super high level, but think about this. Every visual on your page runs a query, at least one query per visual. So if I've got a page that's just littered with visuals, that's a lot of queries and compute and processing power that has to happen for my data to appear, okay? So if you can reduce the number and the complexity of your queries, that's a win. How do you reduce the number of queries? Well, here's one. Make your visuals a little bigger and have fewer visuals on a page, make it easier for someone to read. Another option, something that Gaston talked about in our pre-meeting, that some of you might have heard, there's some new visuals coming out from Microsoft where one visual can host multiple measures, multiple queries, but it packages it into one visual. A multi-card visual is coming, right? There's some great stuff there. A table visual, right? You can layer multiple things in a table or a matrix visual. There's lots of ways to combine things. And so think about that too when you're designing, is how do I reduce the number of visuals on my page and optimize queries and how many queries are sent per page. All right, moving on. And what is high number of visuals on a page? What does it mean? If you've got 20 or more, way too high. A good rule of thumb, I think, is 7 or less. If I have 7 or less visuals on a page, that allows my users the ability to go in and comprehend what they're seeing and maybe get some quick insights. If you litter a page with 20 or 30 visuals, it's really hard for someone to make sense of it all and to understand the connections between the data on the page. That's a really important part of storytelling, is not just, well, here's what this one metric is doing, but here's what this metric is doing, and look how it impacts this other thing, right? That's the value of Power BI, that ability to cross-filter, cross-select, and understand the layering of data and how some data interacts with and affects other data. Really important thing. So if you can limit the number of visuals on a pane, if you've got slicers on your page and it's a slicer that you don't use very much, move it off the page, and there's that nice filter pane, right? In the view part in Power BI Desktop, you can show and hide the filter pane. You can expand it, you can collapse it, and you can control how that filter pane works for your user. If you want it to be visible, you can have it always be visible. If you want them to click to show it, you can teach them how to do that, or even have a little reminder, hey, click the filter pane, there's more stuff you can do there. So anyway, think about that. It moves some of the heavy lifting off your page. All right, next slide. Be careful with complex tables and matrices. All right, a table in a report, this is often, if you're designing a report for someone who loves Excel, what will happen is that user will say, I want Power BI to look like Excel. I want to see a table, and I want to see lots of data, lines and lines of data, and I want to scroll down and go through all my data. That's not what Power BI is for. Can you do it in Power BI? Sure, but that's not really what it's for. So move that complex table to another page, or even better, I love this tip at the very bottom, right? What if you could move it to a tooltip? Move it to a tooltip. And I love this. You can lazy load the tooltips. What that means is that a tooltip doesn't load until you hover over a visual or over a data point. I've done a lot of this lately for clients. Is if there's some complex data or additional insights, instead of showing it on the same page, build a tooltip page. And we'll have to do that sometime. We need to have a session on like tooltips and bookmarks and how to do cross filtering and, you know, how we can do drill throughs and do it with buttons or right clicking. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do as far as, you know, data sharing and user navigation. But a tooltip is great because it only processes the query when you hover over something, and then the tooltip pops up and you can get more information. So anyway, think about things like that. And if you have a detailed table you need to show, get it off your main page, move it to a backup page, and then let someone drill through to that detail. Like, hey, I want to know what's going on in the state of, you know, New York. Great, right click on New York, drill through to the detail, and then you get a New York table instead of loading all the states, you know, for all the places. And we're talking US right now. I know we've got some international folks on the line too, but just the point is move the data off the page, move the detail off, and let someone navigate to it when and as they need it. All right. Next one, remove unnecessary visual interactions. Okay, what that means then is if I've got a lot of visuals on a page and I click on a visual, guess what it's going to do? Default behavior, Power BI, it's going to cross filter. Okay, so it's going to whatever I've clicked on, it's going to use that as a filter for all the other visuals on the page. If I've got a bunch of visuals on one page, maybe I don't need to cross filter one thing with everything else. So edit interactions, that's right down here on the very bottom. I love the edit interactions feature because there's often things on my page that I want to stay there, especially if it's like, hey, I want to show, you know, prior year total. That prior year total could be a target. It could be a reminder of what we're trying to hit. It could be just like a reference point. But if I'm clicking on the page, I don't want it to mess up my prior year total. So I'm going to remove all interactions and just let that number sit there, right? Or if I've got some visuals that are for a certain, you know, use case, like maybe they're geographic type information, and then maybe somewhere else on my page, I might have product information. Maybe you don't want those two things interacting. That can create some complex interactions. So think about that. Think about what each point of your page is used for and edit your interactions. What that means is if I click on something, it doesn't necessarily filter that other thing on the page. All right, so keep that in mind. All right, next tip. Avoid slicers with a very large number of values. What does very large mean? I've heard people say 10,000. I think it's way less. I think it's 100 or less. So if I hit a slicer and it's dropping down a list of things I can pick from, really, you know, if you get more than 30 or 40 things, it's probably too big for a slicer. And the problem with slicers is when you click on the slicer, there's two queries that are running. The first is to populate the slicer, just to show the list of options. And the second is when I click on that option, then it runs another query to bring in the data for that option. So if you have a slicer with massive amounts of data, really complex slicer, move it off your page. Stick it on the filter pane, which it will perform a little bit better over there. And since it's off page, it's not going to slow down your page load. All right, so keep that in mind. So avoid slicers with very large number of values. All right, it looks like our first, oh cool, our first demo is coming up in just a few slides. I'm excited for the first demo. All right, use slicer selection defaults. Oh, this is a good one too. Okay, normally on a slicer, it'll if everything's unselected, then it's going to show all your data. But if there's a common scenario, let's say users, when they come to a page, they're typically looking at, you know, business unit number 1, let's call it, right? Have business unit number 1 pre-selected. Have that be the default slicer. And then if they want to go look at business unit number 2, they can click that and go to business unit number 2. That way, when you load the page, it's loaded with fewer data. It's such a smaller data size. Instead of, hey, I'm loading all the business units for the whole global company, that could take a lot of time. So keep that in mind. If there's a default you want to set on your slicer, go ahead and set it. So that's about knowing your audience and if a default will work or not. All right. Ooh, next slide after this. It's almost demo time, and you'll see it because I put a little reminder for myself. Okay, use sync slicers with care. So syncing slicers is a cool feature in Power BI. What that means then is if I set a slicer on one page, let's say it's a date dimension, and I say I want to look at October 2023, current month, great. I've set that on one page. If I have that same date slicer on different pages in Power BI, what sync slicers will do is it will set all those pages to October. That might be what you want. That might be a good thing, but be careful because when you're setting a slicer on one page and it's slicing every other page, there's a performance hit there. That's additional queries that are running. So use sync slicers with care. Don't use it as a default that every slicer has to be synced across all pages. If that's the business intent, if that's the way the report's going to be used, great, have it sync. But if it's not, be careful with that because it can add a lot of extra queries. Okay, if you ever see one of these boxes, client story and demo time, that means we're going to take a little break from all the slideware and get into something fun. What does Patrick LeBlanc say? What do I like to do? Head over to my computers when he shows you the actual demo. All right, so custom visuals. Okay, custom visuals can be poorly optimized, and here's why. I actually worked with a developer who was trying to get his visuals certified by Microsoft. You know, if it's certified in Power BI, you get the little like blue star, and it says like Power BI certified or whatever. You'll see that if you go to bring in like third-party visuals, you can see which ones are certified by Microsoft. But regardless of whether a visual is certified or not, custom visuals will perform worse than the standard out-of-the-box visuals. Why? Because a custom visual, and I don't know all the details about this, but Gaston could probably tell you. He knows more about the technical side than I do. But custom visuals use a unique API. And those third-party vendors that build those custom visuals have to use that API. That API enables the visual to work with Power BI data, right? Because it's a third-party visual and they go through that API, there's some security and things built into that API, which is good because you don't want your data to be like, you know, pulled out by some third party or, you know, leaked somehow. So it's good, but it reduces the performance a little bit. So if you can use out-of-the-box slicers, or sorry, out-of-the-box visuals in Power BI, do it. Now, what is an out-of-the-box? Let me just show you really quick. I'll bring this in. We'll go here. We'll go to, this page here. All right, visualizations. Here we go. All right, so this part of my screen right here, these are all of the visuals that are built in to Power BI. That's the out-of-the-box stuff. Anything below this little dashed line is your custom stuff. So I got one custom visual in this report. That's a good sign. That means I'm not doing too much custom stuff. So that's a good sign. We'll pull this report back up in a minute. I'm going to use it to share. But let me give you an example of why. Okay, let me find my screenshots. Here we go. Okay, so there's a neat tool in performance or in Power BI called Performance Analyzer. So let me just show you Performance Analyzer. And let me just put this right there. And I'm going to bring in this one here. All right, perfect. So custom visuals on the left-hand side of your screen, okay? So right over here, this is the performance of a report that was littered with custom visuals. You look at the number of milliseconds, it's 21,000 milliseconds, that's about 21 seconds, right? To load a report. Look on the right-hand side of your screen now. Exact same report, we replace the custom visuals with standard out-of-the-box visuals, cuts the performance time in half. So it's a big deal. Like custom visuals are great. You can do some really cool stuff with them. Be very careful that they don't become your norm where you're filling a page with custom visuals. Okay, story time now. So I had back in 2000, my company Slalom won the Power BI Partner of the Year for Microsoft. How did we win it? I'll tell you the story. There was a big retail client. I won't say who they are, but if you look at, Power BI award winner, Power BI Partner of the Year 2020, you'll see who it is. But they had 450 store locations. A lot of the people on the call might know who this is. They were preparing to launch a store-based Power BI report. And what that means is that every single store was going to have their own version of a Power BI report that showed how their store was performing. This was huge for this company because these individual stores were graded on how one location is performing versus another location, right? They had best practices, hey, this store is outperforming your store, or this region is outperforming your region. They had this healthy competition going on. But what they didn't have was any way for a store to know how they were doing, except at the end of the month, they would get some report to say, hey, here's how your store performed last month. Well, that's not very helpful if a store is trying to make changes and adjustments real time. So this Power BI report was doing the following: real-time customer traffic, like same-day traffic. It was showing that same day store adjustments based on that traffic. So if they moved stuff around in the store, like I'm moving this display over here, I'm not going to block the entrance like I was, whatever, they can track what that does to traffic, which was just amazing. It shows revenue, like per transaction, how much someone was buying. It showed how many units per transaction someone was buying. So all of these things that would track the performance of the store was going to be visual and available for the stores to look at midday. So they've got their tablets, they can see how their store is doing. They've got a big sale coming up, they get ready for that sale, customers start coming in, they can track their performance right there. So the stores were unbelievably excited for this new report that was supposed to come 6 months later. And what Slalom did is partnered with this to get that thing launched 6 months earlier. So we beat the launch target by 6 months. And when they announced this at the big sales conference, it was hilarious. The people in the audience literally stood up and gave a standing ovation for a Power BI report. I've never seen that before anywhere else, but it was a standing ovation for a Power BI report because it was so important that they have that data. And because the report was so cool and so impactful, that helped us win Partner of the Year. But the challenge of this report is that when we were about to launch it, the performance was terrible and we were stressed out. How are we going to fix this thing? So it took some data modeling stuff that we did to optimize it. There were a ton of custom visuals on a page that we had to strip out and replace with standard visuals and do some layering and stuff to get the effects they wanted. They were trying to show daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, all on one page. So you would like click a bookmark and then the whole page would flip from a daily view to a weekly view. We broke that up and said, let's move that stuff off page because it was slowing the performance of the initial page. Anyway, we did all this customization stuff, but removing the custom visuals was one of the big things that helped improve the performance of the report. Anyway, they launched the report on time. The people went bananas. It was a lot of fun to see. So anyway, there's an example of the impact of custom visuals. Be careful about that. Don't overuse them. But yeah, if you've got a favorite, awesome. Share it out. Definitely important that we have the custom visual library. I think it's a really cool storefront. So I totally support it. Just be careful with it. Okay. That's it. I need a drink really quick. Been going 100 miles an hour. Any questions on the line or anything that I missed? All right. I'm going to keep going because we've got more good, juicy content. Okay, so that wrapped up report design. Data modeling is next. We've got another demo coming up here in a little bit, but let's talk about how we can have optimal performing reports and our data model can be improved to help that. Okay, so high level, an inefficient data model can completely slow down a report, even with very small data volumes. Okay, so we'll show an example of a data model that is pretty horrendous coming up here in a little bit. So what's your goal? Make the model as small as possible. If you've got a data source with 30 tables, you might not need all 30 tables. Bring in the ones you need. If you've got a table with 30 columns, you might not need all 30 of those columns. Strip it down. Bring in the columns that you need. Don't bring in everything, right? And then make sure that when you're thinking about your relationships between tables, that you're building those relationships purposefully and thoughtfully. In fact, you know what? I'm going to show something right now really quick. And we're going to use this file again in one of our other demos. But here's an example of I call it the sample company report, right? But when I first looked at this data model that the client had, I thought, okay, well, this is cool. Like, I get it. Maybe you've got, what is that, 10, 20, 25 tables or so here. Like, okay, that's fine. But it looks like it's pretty well organized. It's pretty well laid out. Like, I've seen worse data models. And then I started taking a closer look as to what's going on. And I'm like, wait a minute. That's a bidirectional relationship. That's a bidirectional relationship. That's a bidirectional. Wait a minute. Hold on a minute here. We got all these bidirectional Look at that one over here. So I thought, oh my gosh, like what's going on? Because with a bidirectional relationship, what happens is that if you click on one table, it's filtering everything in that other table, and vice versa. If I click on anything in that table or a visual that's powered from that table, it's going to filter everything and everything else. Anyway, avoid bidirectional relationships. We'll talk more about that later as to why. But that's something that was just a killer for this particular report. So make sure that when you're building your relationships between tables in Power BI, be purposeful and thoughtful about that. You typically only want a single directional filter, and it should ideally be a one-to-many relationship. You can have many-to-many. Power BI can make it work. It's not going to perform as well. So keep that stuff in mind. All right. Another tip on your data model, aim for a star schema. What's a star schema? If you're not familiar with Ralph Kimball, go read about the Kimball Group. It's what Power BI runs on. It loves star schemas. A star schema is a data model where you've got facts and dimensions, right? You've got the right granularity for your fact tables. So if it should be daily, then you just got daily data. If you've got monthly, then it's monthly data. That's fine, right? But then you understand the dimensions that support that fact table, a date dimension, a customer dimension, a product dimension, maybe a geographic or store location dimension, an items for sale dimension, all these different categories, whatever it is, these are all dimensions that support the facts that you can slice and dice the facts on, right? That's how Power BI thrives, is with a really good data model. We'll probably have a whole separate section on data modeling. We're not going to do it today, but there's other BI tools out there that are fine with just a flat table. Give it a big flat table with millions of rows and maybe 100 columns, and it can perform okay. But Power BI really, really performs well with a good data model. So that's one of the secret sauces, in my opinion, of Power BI, is it uses these traditional data modeling concepts to really optimize performance, and it makes scalability work a lot better too. So keep that in mind. All right. Another great tip, leveraging a business matrix or a bus matrix. I love bus matrices. What it does is on the left-hand side, this could be just done in Excel, right? You'll list out all the business processes. These are all the events or transactions or things that a business does, right? What are all the things a business goes through? And then across the top, all of the data that you need to measure that thing. Do you need product data or warehouse data or employee data or customer data? And then you just check the boxes and you start to come up with, hey, some of this data is really important. Like in this case, I've highlighted a couple of the columns in red, the date table and the product dimension. Like these are really important to our business. So let's make sure that those perform really well. So this slide says, hey, that could be a good candidate for a data flow. Maybe it's a good candidate to import that data, to have it available so that the whole enterprise can use it. That's the idea, right? Let's make sure those data sets are ready and available and optimized for everyone to use. All right. So bus matrix, great way to make sure that when you're thinking about all the things that the customer or the business needs to do, that you've got the data to support that. So love the bus matrix, great way to just validate that your data model makes sense. Okay, another tip, remove unused tables and columns. I mentioned it before, if you've got a data set that's got 30 tables out there, you might not need all 30 tables. If you have a table with 30 columns, you probably don't need all 30 columns. If you've got any way that you can reduce the size of the data, do it, right? Find a way to reduce the size of your data. Oh, looks like we have a question. Chris, your hand's up. Go for it.
Yeah, so is there, do you know of any quick way to find unused objects? Like
I do.
The other tool that I won't name, like you just click a button and say remove unused objects and they are gone and it's beautiful.
Yes, love that. No, thank you, Chris. You're setting me up for my demo. I appreciate it. Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a minute. So yes, thank you. I will show a demo of that in just a minute. And this kind of leads to my demo. Think about using integers instead of strings. So if you have data that's captured as text or a string and it's numbers, you can probably convert that to integers, right? Make it a number field. Why? Power BI loves numbers. It's ones and zeros. It's binary. It's easy to crunch and to shrink down and understand it. In fact, that's what Power BI does with dates. Every date is actually a number, is how it's stored. It's how Excel stores it too, right? But Power BI is really good with dates because it's just cranking through numbers. That's how the dates are stored. Anyway, so think about that. Okay, so Chris asked a great question. Third-party tools, is there a way to understand what tables I'm not using or what columns I don't need, or, so let's talk about it. So one of my favorite tools that's a newer tool, I've got a little hint here, Bravo for Power BI. Bravo is the name of the tool. So let me show you really quick. Let me pull in my data model here. And you'll notice in Power BI with the different views. So this is the model view. There's a table view, right? And then there's the report view up there. But with different views, you get different ribbons up at the top. So if I'm at my model view and I click on this ribbon called External Tools, I'm going to take a screenshot of this actually, of my external tools. And these tools will only show up if you have installed these in Power BI. So let me just do a screenshot. Let me paste. It is. Okay. That should show up in chat. I wanted folks to see these, not because these are the best external tools, but these are my favorites. So, hey, if it works for me, maybe it'll help you out. So ALM Toolkit, I'll just talk through these really quick, just to kind of explain what they do. Oh, there we go, Dave. Love it. ALM Toolkit's my BFF. Love it. ALM Toolkit, a great tool for taking two Power BI reports, stacking them side by side, and comparing them. Does a phenomenal job of that. Love ALM Toolkit for that. It does some other things too, but I love ALM Toolkit for that. Bravo. What does Bravo do? Bravo was built by the SQL BI team. If you don't know these guys, right? Marco Russo, Alberto Ferrari, we call them the crazy Italians because they're so freaking brilliant with DAX and SQL and Power BI. They built Bravo. It's a little puppy dog. If you can't tell what that icon is, it's a dog. I think Bravo was someone's dog or something. I don't know how it works out, but Marco Russo explains it on some of his videos. But I love Bravo. In fact, we're going to use Bravo in just a minute. I'll show you how it works. But anyway, I'll show you some of the things that Bravo can do. It's a very good entry-level third-party tool. Okay. As I go across, I'll explain which ones are good entry level and which ones are more advanced, because there's some of these tools that are for like level 300, level 400 developers when you're getting deep, right? We'll talk about that. DAX Studio. Okay. Here's one that's a little bit deeper. You can do a lot in DAX Studio, but it's a great way to optimize your DAX. You can run DAX in there. You can test the speed of it. You can make sure that your DAX is like structured properly. Excuse me. DAX Studio can do a lot of other things as well. So we should probably do a whole separate section on DAX Studio because there's just so much capability in that tool. But it's built by the same guys that do Bravo. It's built by the SQL BI team. So anyway, if you find one, you'll find the other. Power BI Helper. I love this tool. A lot of people haven't heard about Power BI Helper. What Power BI Helper, what I use it for is for documentation. Because when you're done building a report, it's important to document what you did. Now, Power BI kind of does that, right? It's got the applied steps and it tracks what you do. But Power BI Helper can export like all your measures, all the M code to like a Word document. It's a great way to document. So I love Power BI Helper for that. And then Tabular Editor, if you want to get under the covers and find out what's going on, use those endpoints, go connect directly to your data model and premium capacities. I used Tabular Editor once to take a 20 gig data model to chunk it up into smaller tables and do incremental loads. Tabular Editor was able to help me do that. So you can do a lot with Tabular Editor. So once I've got these third-party tools installed, you just click the tool. So I'm going to click Bravo. Here's Bravo. He's launching. There it is. And since I already have a report connected, it knows it's looking at the data in that report. And look at some of the features. I'm going to click on, this is a measure, which is funny. This client named the measure a date, but that's the actual name of the measure. But you can look at one of these measures. I can click on the measure and look at this. Format the selected measure. Watch what it does. It says, congratulations, you successfully formatted a measure. Well, what does format a measure mean? Then I get a little check mark right here, right? I click on that measure. Whoa, look at that. Optimized for reading. Fantastic. So this is kind of what it looked like before, something like this, where it was all on one line, right? You click the measure, click format it, and DAXformatter.com is another place to do this, but you go look at it. Beautiful. Much easier to read, easier on the eyes. This is how you should type your measures while you're writing them. But if you don't, that's okay. Bravo can help. Love that about the tool. The other thing Bravo has, it's got a date capacity. It can look at your dates in your data model and then help you build date tables and optimize those date tables. Love that about Bravo, because a good date table, critical to Power BI performance, right? Okay, analyze model. Here we go. So what Analyze Model does is it makes this really cool tree map over here, and the size of the different things shows you the size of that field in your data model. So look at this. Look at this right here. This column called member ID is from a table called Fact Customers. It is 504 megabytes. One column is 500 meg. That's half a gig. One column. Okay, so when I saw this, I thought, all right, what is going on? So I immediately said, I got to go look at it, because the client was said, hey, this report isn't performing well. The data model is slow. This was one of the smoking guns. All right, so let me show you. When we pull up that particular table, here we go, Fact Customers, here's the table, member ID. So I looked at this and I thought, well, that doesn't look like a big deal. It's just a field where, you know, every member has an ID number assigned to them. Well, that's not a big deal. And then I clicked on it and realized, wait a minute, there's leading zeros. How are there leading zeros? Unless, most of you probably already caught this, it's text. It was storing 6.5 million unique values as text. And I talked to the client, I said, do you really need the leading zeros? They said, no, that's just how the source system brings it in. I said, so we don't use the zeros? They said, no. In the stores, the rep just types in the number. They don't use the zeros. I said, so no one really needs these zeros. They're just in there because they were in a source system. Yes, so we converted it from text to an integer. Boom. The data model went from like 500 megabytes for that one column down to like 1 meg or 2 meg. It was just crazy, the difference. So anyway, love Bravo. Great tool. A lot of just basic functionality in there, but it's a great way to find what I call your heavy columns. And if you have a heavy column, if you can get rid of that column completely, awesome. Get it out of your data model if you don't need it. If you can at least convert it to something, right? If you here's another example. I'm kind of going off script a little bit, but that's okay. If I've got something with a repeating thing, let me see if I anyway, I'll just talk to it. But there was also a category assigned to each customer, and those categories were repeating. It was only 4 or 5 categories, but I thought, why do you have all that text? The text was a description of the category on every single row. I said, take those descriptions and put them in their own table called customer category. And then in your fact table, you just have a number. Number 1 is category A. Number 2, category B. And then you've got integers in your fact table, and all your text is captured offline in a dimension. Anyway, totally sped things up. Love Bravo, great way to do it. But remember, to launch these third-party tools, install the tool, and then it's just going to show up. It's going to show up in Power BI as an external tool. So there you go. Hack of the day, go download these third-party tools. A lot of fun and a great way to speed up your performance. All right, we'll do more on third-party tools in a little bit. I know I'm running kind of short, so we're going to flip through some of these because I want to get to the good stuff. Use integers. We talked about that. Oh, pre-sort your integers. Okay, that's another thing. Pre-sort your things. Surrogate key, right? Keys that connect tables. Okay, so make sure that if you have connections between tables, that you're doing so with integers and not strings. Let me show you an example. I had a client once that was complaining about a slow running report. I'm going to drop this in the chat. I looked at one of their ID fields. It was 40 characters long, and it was text and numbers, totally hodgepodge of string, right, data, and that was connecting 2 tables, and it was unsorted. So what that means then is if I'm filtering anything on one table, it's got to go to this 40-character string, read the entire column, figure out what the heck that connects to in the other table. It was just a mess. We converted these ridiculous strings to integers, totally sped up the performance. Went from 5 to 10 minutes to load the page to less than 10 seconds. So anyway, use integers. They're fantastic. Pre-sort it upstream in your data source. It's going to make your report scream and work a lot better. All right, we're running low on time. I want to get to my demos and my stories because that's the fun stuff. Bi-directional relationships. Okay, I think we already talked about this. Yeah, we did. Okay, so I showed you the example with all the bi-directional relationships. There were probably 15 or 20 connections between tables that were bi-directional. Here's the other kicker. they also had 7, I think the number was 7 date tables. 7 date tables. And on different pages, they would use different filters and slicers that connected to alternate date tables. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. All you really need is one. You need one date table. And then all your facts and dimensions can connect to that one date table. And if you need additional dates, like a calendar date versus a fiscal date, great. Build that into your one date table. You don't need separate tables for everything. So anyway, eliminate additional tables and get rid of bidirectional relationships. All right, moving on. Okay, I know we're running low on time. We're going to keep going. Oh, cool. All right, DAX. Okay, I'm gonna whip through this DAX really quick because I want to get to my next demo before we wrap up. So use variables. Okay, if you haven't used variables, you're gonna fall in love with them once you get going. A variable is, okay, check out this DAX right here. You can see it says if total rows, that's a measure, is greater than 10, then do sum of the revenue and divide that by total rows. Else put 0. Okay, so there's my if then statement. So you'll see total rows shows up twice. What that means is that every time this ratio, and that's the name of this measure, it's called ratio. Every time ratio is used in a visual, okay, it's going to run total rows twice. It's going to execute that measure 2 times, which is going to slow down your performance. Now, what if I set up a variable? So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to set a variable in my DAX code. I'm going to say total rows equals the measure total rows. And then in my ratio measure, okay, now in my ratio measure, I've got total rows here and I've got total rows here. But guess what? It only calculated it once. And then you're just rinsing and repeating. I'm reusing that variable. Now, variables only live inside one measure, right? You can't use a variable somewhere else. But setting up variables at the top of your measure and then using them in the more complex DAX is a great way to improve performance. So love variables. Use the divide instead of the slash. In Excel, you put a slash. Never, never, never in Power BI. Use the divide. Why? It can deal with zeros in your numerator. Love it. So yeah, use divide. It's the way to go. Don't change blanks to zeros. Leave them blank in Power BI. What it does in the background is it converts it from blank to null, and it can screen through null really quickly. So don't put in like a bunch of zeros or spaces in your data model. Like, don't do that. Leave it blank if it's blank. Calculating ratios efficiently. I didn't even know this was a thing, but it says that optimally, and I love this tip from Microsoft because I didn't even know, use A minus B divided by B instead of this or this as a way to calculate, ratio. So this is how you're calculating growth, right? What was this period versus last period, or this year versus last year? Anyway, use the one on the left and not the ones on the right. I had no idea that it affected performance, but it does. So there you go. Love that tip. Use selected value instead of has one value. I used to love has one value. I pulled away from that. Selected value is faster. Interesting. So there's some DAX that actually works better than other DAX. What? Yeah, some of the DAX is higher performing than other DAX. Crazy. Avoid using if error and is error, which is a great way to check if there's an error in the calculation. There's other ways to handle that. I'll send this deck out. Don't worry about capturing all this. And then use is blank instead of equals blank. All right. Okay, demo number 4. All right. Well, I'm going to get to this last demo because this is one of my last tips. And I love this one. And so I think we can pull it off in time. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to open up a report in Power BI. Now, if any of you have done dashboard in a day, you'll recognize this report because this report is called DIAD Final Report. Now, one thing about this demo, kudos to Ruth Martinez. She owns the company Kerbal. If you search for Ruth or Kerbal out there, fantastic content, great website, great YouTube channel, and a former speaker on SeaPUG. So Ruth was here. She spoke with us. I loved her session. Go back and look at our recordings. I think that you can get to those recordings. They're actually, I think they're all on YouTube now. Wesley, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that all of our past recordings are out there. If not, they will be soon. But yeah.
Not everything, but it definitely goes, not everything, but you can basically go back to 2022. I think you'll get.
Is Ruth out there? I bet Ruth is out there, right? Ruth is there.
I'm pretty sure she is.
All right.
Oh, there we go. And Andrew
just dropped it in there, and then you can scroll down in the comments for the YouTube.
Thank you. Love it. All right. So really quick, we're almost out of time, but let me show you. I'm going to go into View. I'm going to go into Performance Analyzer, and I'm going to turn it on. This is a great way to test your performance. And then what you can do is you can just start to do stuff. So let's say I'm a customer and I want to look at 3 years instead of 7 years. Okay. Now I want to look at 8 years. Okay. Now I'm going to let's just drill down here. Great. Okay. Let's move over to Australia and let's drill into Australia. Great. And look over here on the right-hand side, like in Performance Analyzer, it's capturing everything I'm doing. Let me right click and drill through to the manufacturer page. Here we go. I just drilled through to New South Wales. Okay, let's expand urban. Let's filter 2021. Okay, so all this stuff I did is like a user going through and using a report. It captures it all here. I can hit export and it'll say, all right, where do you want to export? I'm going to call this SeaPUG. There we go. And now, okay, so that was, and then I'm done, stop. I can click the stop button. I'm done analyzing the performance of my report. And then I open up Ruth Martinez's solution. This is great. Now, she has some content that she sells on her website, and it's fantastic, gated content, really good stuff. This was one that she was offering up for free. That's why I'm comfortable sharing it. But I think that I'm not going to send this report out. You'll have to go to her website to get it yourself. But it's a way to visualize the performance analyzer stuff, the performance analyzer testing that we just did. So open this up. Come on, report. You can do it. Oh my gosh, Teams knows I'm up against the deadline. It's not being very user-friendly. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm just going to talk to it because I know we're out of time and I want to get to my last slide, but I'm just going to talk to it. What it does is, first of all, it's a fantastic solution, but you can import that file that I just exported and it visualizes your performance. Ruth has made visuals, so you can see, here's my highest performing, here's my lowest performing. Oh, it looks like it's loading. Come on, I swear sometimes Teams and Power BI don't play well together just because it's just slower. But Power BI embedded in Teams, now that works great, but Power BI desktop in Teams, sometimes things slow down a bit. Come on. All right, the demo gods are not happy with me. But anyway, the point is it can bring in that JSON file that you exported, it'll visualize it, and you can see which visuals are slowing your report down. And it's a great way to pinpoint, hey, I got to fix the DAX in this visual, or I've got to go modify that visual because that's what's slowing me down. So I wish I could demo it, but I'm out of time. So let me just kind of get to my final slide here and show you what I want to do to wrap things up. And here's the summary for today. Number one, you as a Power BI developer have the power to make beautiful performant reports that your users will love. Like, you have that power. That's the great thing about Power BI. It empowers the end user and the developer. Second bullet, think about performance from the start. Think about it when you're gathering requirements. Think about it when you're wireframing and doing your mockups. Think about performance all the time. And third, get to know those third-party tools and use them to test and validate that your report, your model, and your DAX will perform. There's some great third-party tools. Yes, Microsoft has built in some. Performance Analyzer is one. That's functionality that used to be in DAX Studio, right? Performance Analyzer is great. And then there's also a performance test in Power Query with M that you can do. And then there's all those admin reports. So yes, Microsoft is kicking out some great stuff, but there's some third-party tools that Microsoft blesses that you can use them to your advantage, make great performing reports, and your end users are going to love them. So thank you all for your time. Sorry that I went a little bit over, but hopefully that helps with how to optimize in Power BI.